Have you ever gone through that devastating experience of understanding something fundamental about reality, something so profound and disturbing that it forever changed how you see the world, and then discovered there's no way to unknow what you now know? Perhaps it happened during a casual conversation when someone mentioned a historical fact that shattered a belief you'd carried since childhood. Or maybe it occurred while you were reading a book, watching a documentary, or even reflecting alone in a moment of silence. Suddenly, the pieces fell together in a way they could never be undone, and you found yourself facing a truth you would have preferred not to know. It's as if an invisible veil covering your eyes had been removed, revealing an aspect of human existence that was always there, but which you had successfully ignored until that precise moment. The sensation is simultaneously one of liberation and imprisonment. Liberation because you finally see clearly. Imprisonment because you can no longer return to the comfort of your previous ignorance. This is one of the most universally human experiences and, paradoxically, one of the loneliest. Millions of people go through this transformation every day, but each carries the weight of this revelation in almost complete isolation, as if they were the only one cursed with such clarity. What makes this experience even more anguishing is the gradual realization that most people around you continue living as if this truth doesn't exist. They follow their routines, maintain their convictions, participate in the same social rituals and superficial conversations, while you carry the knowledge of something that fundamentally alters the meaning of all of this. It's like watching a theater performance, knowing that all the actors have forgotten their acting. You see the strings that move the marionettes, but you can't simply stand up from the audience and reveal the trick to everyone because you know the revelation wouldn't be well received. In fact, you've discovered that trying to share these perceptions usually results in social isolation, misunderstanding, or even hostility. People have deep emotional investments in maintaining certain illusions, and those who dare to question them often become targets of unconscious resentment. Thus, you learn to navigate two worlds simultaneously. The world of shared appearances, where you need to function socially, and the world of deeper understanding, where your true experience of reality resides. Throughout human history, thinkers, philosophers, scientists, and artists have described this same existential condition with different words, but always capturing the essence of this particular pain. Plato spoke of the cave and the difficulty of returning to tell others about sunlight. Buddha described the suffering inherent in conscious existence. Nietzsche wrote about the burden of carrying truths that few are prepared to bear. Each of them, in their own way, touched on this fundamental wound. Once you see, you can no longer stop seeing. Once you understand the mechanisms behind the grand narratives that govern human life, you can no longer participate in them with the same previous innocence. This doesn't necessarily mean you become cynical or bitter, although these are real risks. It means you carry a double consciousness, awareness of what is apparent and awareness of what lies behind the apparent. You live simultaneously on the surface and in the depths, and this duplicity requires constant psychological energy that can be exhausting. It's like being an anthropologist of your own culture, observing from within and without at the same time, never completely immersed in immediate experience, because you're always conscious of the larger patterns that govern it. In our current era, this condition has become even more complex and widespread. Modern technology has created powerful tools for revealing truths that previously remained hidden in the shadows of academic specialization or esoteric knowledge. The internet has democratized access to information that was historically available only to small circles of initiates. Anyone with sufficient curiosity can now investigate the origins of institutions that govern their life, question the historical narratives they learned in school, discover how the economic and political systems that shape their daily experience really function. They can explore different philosophical and religious traditions, compare cosmogonies, study neuroscience and psychology to understand the mechanisms of their own mind. This democratization of knowledge has profound and not entirely predictable consequences. On one hand, it empowers individuals and allows for more sophisticated understanding of reality. On the other hand, it creates a generation of people who carry the weight of insights that their social structures weren't designed to accommodate. The result is a peculiarly modern form of alienation. Not Marx's alienation of the worker, which was unconscious of its condition, but the conscious alienation of those who clearly see how mechanisms of control, manipulation, and collective illusion function, but must continue participating in them to survive. This conscious alienation manifests in various ways in daily life. You might be in a work meeting listening to discussions about productivity and goals, while part of your mind observes the power games in operation, the underlying psychological dynamics, the way certain words are used to create compliance without questioning. You might be watching the news and perceiving not just what's being reported, but how it's being reported, which perspectives are being privileged, what questions aren't being asked, how certain narratives are constructed to produce specific emotional reactions. You might be in an apparently innocent social conversation and notice patterns of conformity, subtle signals of hierarchy, the way people perform idealized versions of themselves based on cultural expectations they themselves haven't fully questioned. This constant perception of meta-patterns creates a sense of distance that can be profoundly lonely. You're present, but also observing your own presence. You're participating, but also analyzing your own participation. It's a form of self-consciousness that can be both illuminating and paralyzing. I need to pause for a moment to ask you directly. When was the last time you felt this kind of uncomfortable awakening? That moment when you understood something about the nature of reality that you would have preferred not to understand? Perhaps it was something about how human relationships really work, or about the constructed nature of values you considered absolute, or about the psychological mechanisms that govern your own decisions. I know we often keep these revelations to ourselves, perhaps out of fear of seeming pretentious or too pessimistic in a world that values superficial optimism. But your experience is valid and most likely shared by more people than you imagine. If this theme resonates with you, share in the comments. My moment of uncomfortable awakening happened when I understood that. Your honesty might be exactly what someone needs to read today to feel less alone in this journey of deeper understanding of human existence. The central paradox of this condition is that the knowledge that causes suffering also offers a unique form of liberation. While it's true that you can no longer return to previous ignorance, it's also true that deeper understanding of reality's mechanisms offers possibilities for more conscious and potentially wiser navigation. When you understand how emotional manipulation systems work, you become less susceptible to them. When you clearly see the unconscious dynamics that govern human behavior, you can make more deliberate choices about how to respond to them. When you recognize the constructed nature of many structures that seemed natural and inevitable, you can participate in their reconstruction in more intentional ways. The suffering comes from resistance to the new reality, from nostalgia for lost simplicity, from the sense of isolation that accompanies differentiated perception. But there's also a particular dignity in carrying difficult truths, a form of courage that develops only through willingness to face uncomfortable aspects of human existence. It's what some philosophical traditions call amor fati, not just accepting, but completely embracing reality as it is, including its most disturbing aspects. This radical acceptance isn't passive or resigned. On the contrary, it liberates psychological energy that was previously spent resisting reality, allowing more creative and effective engagement with possibilities for transformation. When you stop fighting against the fact that certain illusions are illusions, you can begin to work consciously with them or create more satisfying alternatives. When you accept that alienation is part of the modern human condition, you can seek authentic forms of connection that honor both your lucidity and your need for belonging. When you recognize that existential suffering is inseparable from elevated consciousness, you can develop practices and perspectives that make this suffering more bearable and perhaps even transform it into a source of wisdom and compassion. The Buddhist tradition has an interesting concept for this. Bodhisattva, the being who awakens to truth about the nature of reality, but chooses to remain in the world of suffering to help others on their journey of understanding. It's a powerful metaphor for the possibility of transforming the pain of awakening into a force of compassionate service. Contemporary technology is creating conditions for this transformation to happen on an unprecedented scale. For the first time in human history, large segments of the population have instant access to virtually any information, can connect with people who share similar concerns regardless of geographical boundaries, and have tools to create and disseminate their own narratives about reality. This is leading to a kind of collective awakening, though fragmented and disorganized. Millions of people are simultaneously questioning official narratives, exploring alternative philosophies, experimenting with new forms of social and economic organization, creating art and literature that expresses this double consciousness we're discussing. It's an extraordinary historical moment, though also profoundly destabilizing. Traditional institutions that historically mediated access to knowledge and interpretation of reality are losing their monopoly. This creates enormous opportunities for greater intellectual and creative autonomy, but also significant risks of social fragmentation, epistemological confusion, and manipulation by new types of authorities who know how to exploit the psychological vulnerability of people in transition. The challenge for those who carry this double consciousness is finding ways to live with integrity in a world that hasn't yet developed adequate structures to accommodate higher levels of collective consciousness. This requires a combination of practical wisdom, moral courage, and social creativity. Practical wisdom to distinguish between useful truth and truth that simply cause unnecessary suffering. Moral courage to remain true to what you've seen and understood, even when this means accepting certain types of loneliness or misunderstanding. And social creativity to find or create communities, practices, and forms of expression that honor both your lucidity and your fundamental humanity. This might mean seeking relationships with people who are on similar journeys of questioning and discovery. It might mean developing contemplative practices that help process the intensity of revelations you're having about the nature of reality. It might mean finding forms of artistic, intellectual, or activist expression that transform your understanding into constructive contributions to cultural evolution. Or it might simply mean learning to live with more compassion for yourself and others who haven't yet reached the point of awakening where you find yourself. One of the most important discoveries on this journey is that truth is not a destination, but a continuous process. What you see today as ultimate truth will probably reveal new layers of complexity and nuance as your capacity for perception continues developing. This can be both humbling and liberating. Humbling because you realize that your current understanding, no matter how profound it seems, is still limited and partial. Liberating because you free yourself from the pressure of having to defend a fixed worldview and can embrace continuous openness to new ways of seeing and understanding. This dynamic perspective on truth also alleviates some of the loneliness that accompanies initial awakening. You begin to see that it's not a matter of being right while others are wrong, but of being at different stages of a process that is inherently human. The continuous search for deeper understanding of reality and our place in it. This can cultivate a special form of compassion. Compassion for those who haven't yet seen what you've seen. Compassion for yourself when struggling with the implications of what you've seen. And compassion for the general human condition, which seems to involve inevitable cycles of illusion, awakening, suffering, and potential transformation. This compassion isn't condescending or superiority-driven. It's based on recognition that awakening to difficult truths is often painful and that not everyone is at a moment in life when they can deal with certain types of revelation. There's timing to these things. There's wisdom in respecting where people are in their journeys, even when you can clearly see the limitations of their current perspectives. This doesn't mean you should always remain silent about what you've understood, but it means you can learn to share your insights in ways that honor others' dignity and autonomy, rather than trying to force revelations they may not be prepared to receive. It's a delicate art, being honest about your own experience of reality without imposing that experience as the only valid one, being available for those who demonstrate genuine curiosity about deeper questions without becoming an evangelist of your own enlightenment. maintaining your intellectual and spiritual integrity without completely isolating yourself from social structures that are still necessary for functional life. Perhaps the deepest understanding that emerges from this experience of uncomfortable awakening is that the human condition is fundamentally paradoxical, and that learning to live with paradox may be more valuable than trying to resolve. We are simultaneously animals and something beyond animals. We are products of historical and social forces we don't control, and at the same time, agents capable of conscious transformation. We are unique individuals and part of a larger collective fabric. We are beings who seek truth and meaning in a universe that may be fundamentally without inherent purpose. These contradictions aren't problems to be solved, but creative tensions to be embraced. When you stop fighting against the paradox of human existence and learn to dance with it, something interesting happens. The pain of awakening doesn't disappear completely, but transforms into a peculiar form of melancholic joy, the joy of seeing clearly, even when what you see is disturbing, the joy of being able to admire the complexity and beauty of human systems, even when you also see their limitations and distortions. The joy of consciously participating in the great experiment that is human civilization, even knowing that much of it is improvisation based on questionable assumptions. This melancholic joy can become a source of profound appreciation for human experience in all its contradictoriness. You can simultaneously admire the innocence of someone who still completely believes in narratives you recognize as social constructions, and the courage of that same person in living fully within those narratives. You can feel tenderness for the illusions people need to maintain to function emotionally, even while you yourself can no longer sustain them. You can participate in social rituals you consider arbitrary, but find beauty in how they create shared connection and meaning for those who participate with genuine faith. This posture is neither cynical nor sentimental. It's a mature form of love for humanity that includes both its limitations and its possibilities, both its blindness and its occasional capacity for true vision. It's what mystics from various traditions have called non-dual vision, the ability to see simultaneously the imperfection and perfection of existence, suffering and beauty, illusion and truth, without needing to choose sides or artificially reconcile opposites. We now arrive at a crucial point in this reflection. Understanding that carrying difficult truths is not a burden you must bear alone, but a responsibility that can be shared in creative and constructive ways. Human history is largely the history of people who saw something others couldn't see and found ways to translate that vision into contributions that elevated the general level of consciousness and possibility. Artists who expressed aspects of human experience that hadn't been articulated before. Scientists who revealed patterns in nature that transformed our understanding of ourselves. Philosophers who questioned fundamental assumptions about reality, morality, and meaning. Activists who pointed to injustices that were invisible to the majority. Each of these contributors had to navigate the tension between their particular vision and the limitations of their time's collective consciousness. Each found ways to translate potentially disturbing insights into languages and forms that could be gradually received and integrated by the broader culture. This suggests that your experience of uncomfortable awakening, while it may seem isolated and difficult, is actually part of a larger evolutionary process through which human consciousness expands and deepens over time. If these reflections have touched on something you've been feeling, but perhaps haven't found words to express completely, know that you are not alone in this experience of sometimes painful awareness about deeper aspects of reality. By subscribing to this channel, you'll connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for more honest and complete understanding of the existential challenges of our time. Each week, we meet here to explore together the great questions that define our era and to seek not just intellectual understanding, but also wiser and more compassionate ways of living amid the complexities we're discovering. This isn't just a channel, but a space for dialogue and collective growth where your experience of awakening can transform from uncomfortable isolation into meaningful connection with others who are navigating similar territories of expanded understanding. The journey of awakening to uncomfortable truths is ultimately a journey of return to a more authentic form of humanity. When you let go of illusions, you can no longer sustain and learn to live with the truths you've discovered. You become capable of more honest relationships, both with yourself and with others. You develop discernment capacities that allow you to navigate modern life's complexity with greater wisdom and less unnecessary suffering. You find ways to contribute to the common good that are based on real understanding, not good intentions founded on questionable assumptions. And perhaps most importantly, you discover that it's possible to maintain hope and find purpose even in a world you see with sometimes disturbing clarity. This hope isn't based on denial of the difficulties you perceive, but on confidence that human consciousness is capable of continuous evolution and that your own contribution to this evolution, no matter how small it may seem, is part of something greater than you can fully comprehend. Uncomfortable awakening, seen from this perspective, is not the end of innocence, but the beginning of a more mature and responsible way of participating in the great adventure of conscious human existence.
I love to consider myself a storyteller. As an actor and a filmmaker, it's something that I think of as more than a job. I connect to it on maybe an existential level, on who I am. And one thing I often like to say even is that storytelling is a big part of what makes humans human. So as an expert on the history and the prehistory of what humans are, I'm curious to hear what you think of that statement. If I say storytelling is a big part of what makes humans human, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yes.
this is the this is the source of our power. We control the world because we can cooperate in much larger numbers than any other animal. And the secret of cooperation of humans is stories. I mean, you can't get to know more than 100 or 200 individuals, but the same story can be known to millions and even billions of people. And as long as everybody believes the same story, they can cooperate. They can agree on norms and values and so forth.
I read in an interview that you gave The Guardian they asked you the greatest regret of your life, and you said not being open about your sexuality earlier.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Why it's my biggest regret?
Yes.
Or why? Because I think that the pain of kind of living in denial to myself. I mean, when I say it's a regret not coming out, it's not to other people, it's to myself. And looking back, the writing was on the wall when I was like 14, 15 for sure. Like if I would be on the beach, I would definitely look at the guys, not at the girls. But I couldn't acknowledge it. Like I had a divided mind. That one part of the mind knew absolutely 100%, and the other part of the mind had absolutely no idea. And again, it was just too much to handle, I guess. But this situation of living in denial and in repression of myself, just looking back, it was a lot of painful years.
まずこのネクサスですけれども、この本の大部分は2021年から2022年の間に書かれたということですけれども、読んでみて2回読ませていただきましたけど、読んでみてもう今の世界とのリンクっていうのを感じました。特にトランプ政権です。ハラリさんは今の世界情勢っていうのをどんなふうにご覧になってますか？
The situation is very difficult. Because we see that humans are losing trust in each other, and the order is collapsing, both within countries and also between countries. And maybe the most worrying thing is that there is no leadership for humanity at the present moment. Because the strongest country in the world, the United States, now openly says that it cares mainly about making itself stronger, even at the expense of other countries. And at this moment in history, what we need above all is to have good leadership that will unite humanity instead of dividing it in order to deal with both climate change and the rise of artificial intelligence.
そのアメリカのトランプ大統領ですけど、その歴史的に見てどんな存在ですか？得意な存在ですか？
No, he's actually going back to a very old view of the world. For what he basically says is that he views the world in terms of strong and weak, and he expects the weak to obey the strong. When he blames Ukraine for the Russian attack on Ukraine, people say, how can that be? How can he blame the Ukrainians for the Russian attack? But in his mind, the order of the world is that the weak must obey the strong. And if the weak refuse the demands of the strong and there is conflict, it is the fault of the weak, not the fault of the strong. He feels the same way like when he says that America now wants to take Greenland. So if Denmark refuses, if there is any conflict in his mind, this is because Denmark refused the American demand. So this view of human affairs is actually very, very old. This is the old imperial view that expected always the strong to dominate and the weak to obey them. In recent decades, we have established a different order in the world, which is based more on law and less on strength, on power. Even though there have been a lot of conflicts and wars, and I come from the Middle East, so I know it perfectly well, still, it was the most peaceful period in human history because there was one a taboo which countries were not allowed to break, and this taboo that strong countries cannot invade and conquer weaker countries just because they are stronger. And this taboo made countries feel much safer, which allowed them to spend less money on the military, on defense, and instead spend more on healthcare and education and welfare and so forth. This was not some fantasy. This was actual reality, which you can see in government budgets. For most of history, the governments, whether of democracies or of dictatorships, of empires or city-states, almost all governments spent more than 50% of their budget on the military, on soldiers, on warships, on building fortresses and castles. In the early 21st century, countries felt so safe that the average expenditure on the military was just about 6 or 7% of the government budget all over the world. In contrast, about 10% of the budget was spent on healthcare. This was the first time in human history that governments spent more on healthcare, on nurses and doctors and hospitals, than they spent on the military, on soldiers and warships and fortresses. And unfortunately, this is now changing. With the Russian invasion of Ukraine, with the policies of the Trump administration, countries again feel insecure. They feel the only thing that protects us against invasion and conquest by a stronger country is if we have a bigger military. And countries in Europe, countries in East Asia and elsewhere, they suddenly feel that they cannot rely anymore on the international order. They cannot rely anymore on America. They have to increase their military budgets, build bigger armies. And of course, if everybody does it, you'll have an arms race, and the situation will just keep deteriorating.
歴史学者のハラリさんから見て、今この時代っていうのは過去の歴史のどんな時と似ているっていうふうに考えますか？
In some ways, yes, because this turmoil and the collapse of one order and the creation of a different order, this has been going on for thousands of years. But there are differences this time, and the biggest difference is the rise of artificial intelligence, of AI. Because AI is different from every previous technology in history. It is not a tool, it is an agent. Every previous technology, whether people invented, whether a printing press, a car, a train, or an airplane, this is a tool in our hands that makes us more powerful because we decide what to do with it. AI is an agent in the sense that it can make decisions by itself and it can invent new ideas by itself. So an AI weapon can decide by itself what to attack. And it can even invent new weapons and new military strategies. The big question of the present historical moment is what happens when we release millions upon millions of non-human agents, which in many ways are more intelligent than us, and give them the power to increasingly control our economy, the military, the media. We already saw it in the field of media, that power is shifting from humans to AIs. Previously, if you go back 50 years or 100 years, so the most important people in media are often the editors that decide what to broadcast. Or a newspaper editor decides what will be on the front page of the newspaper tomorrow. So millions of people will read it, and this is what they'll be thinking about, this is what they'll be discussing. If you ask who are the most important editors today, already today they are not human beings. They are the AIs, the algorithms that manage the social media news feeds. Who is the editor of Twitter or TikTok or the Facebook newsfeed? It is not a human being. It is an AI. And part of the reason for the collapse of trust between humans and the crisis of democracies all over the world is that we have given control of the conversation to a non-human intelligence. Now, democracy is in essence is a conversation between humans. Dictatorship is a dictate. One person dictates everything. Democracy is when lots of people talk with each other, discuss, argue sometimes, and try to reach a decision together. But now this conversation is increasingly managed by a non-human intelligence, which comes between us. We mostly interact through digital means, which are managed by AI, and we often also interact with non-human bots and algorithms, and this is destroying the trust between humans. So we have this paradoxical situation that we have the most sophisticated information technology in history, and people are losing the ability to talk with each other.
それだけの今情報社会の中 AI の革命も来ているそういう中で言論の自由を追求することと、情報の正確さを、精査していくこと、そのバランスを保つってことはとても難しいことだと思います。それを叶えるためにはどうしたらいいんでしょうか。
We should be very clear about the difference between the freedom of human beings and the freedom of algorithms. If I publish something online, on Facebook or Twitter or TikTok, as a human being, this should be protected. Except in very extreme cases, we should not ban or censor the speech of human beings. But the problem in social media is not the human speech. It is the decisions of algorithms. Humans produce a lot of content. You have millions of people writing things, taking videos, taking pictures, posting it online. Then the algorithms decide to promote, to spread certain information and not other. And very often, the algorithms decide to deliberately spread fake news and conspiracy theories and hate. Why? Because they want to increase user engagement. They want more people to spend more time on the platform because this is how the social media company makes money. And they discovered that hatred and anger and greed, they create engagement. If you want to keep people for longer on the platform, you spread anger. And this is not protected by freedom of speech because this is decisions of algorithms. When an algorithm decides that from all the different content that humans produce, it will promote some angry post, this is a decision of a non-human, and it is not, should not be protected by freedom of speech. Similarly, a lot of, again, the hatred and anger online is actually produced and spread by bots. You go online and you read something that makes you very angry, and you think you are reading the words of another human being, or you are seeing content produced by another human being. But actually, it was produced by bots. And bots don't have freedom of speech. So, again, we should be very careful not to censor human beings, but governments should ban bots and AIs from pretending to be human beings. If I go online, I need to know, am I talking with another human or am I talking with an AI? Similarly, governments should have regulations about the decisions that social media algorithms take. If the algorithms deliberately spread misinformation and fake news and conspiracy theories, this should be banned. Again, not the content produced by the humans, but the deliberate spread of certain content by the algorithms.
本の中でも眉の世界っていうのを表現されていると思います。その眉の世界から人間が冷静になり客観的になり、ちゃんとそういうものを制御できるようになるためにはどういうシステムだったりどういうことが必要なんですか？
So, when the internet first came, the main metaphor that people had was the web. Like a single web that connects everybody. But now the main metaphor became the cocoon, like different people are entrapped, encased inside a different information cocoon, and they see completely different realities, so they can no longer understand and communicate with each other. And this danger is only becoming worse because previously AIs could spread content produced by humans. Now more and more content is actually produced by the AIs. And we have no experience with such a situation. For thousands of years, all the cultural products that we encountered were the product of the human mind, of the human imagination. All the poetry, all the books we read, all the theater, television, paintings, everything was created by the human mind. Now we live in a world in which more and more of the cultural products that surround us comes from a non-human intelligence. And we have no experience, no idea how to manage such a situation. So what we need above all else is simply time. We need to slow down the pace of development of AI, of change, just simply to give human society time to adapt. And part of it is teaching people how, for instance, to tell the difference between reliable and unreliable information. This is the job, traditionally, of schools, of universities. For instance, in history department, where I teach, what we teach students, you don't teach them to remember just facts from the past, like which battle was in which year, or all names of kings. This is not what you learn in history lesson. What you learn is how to tell the difference between reliable information and unreliable information. Now, this takes time. And what happens now is we are flooded by more and more types of information that we never encountered before. Like previously, if you saw a video, you could believe what you saw because there was no way to fake it. Now everybody knows that it's very easy to create fake videos with AI. And we don't know how to tell the difference between reliable and unreliable. So it's not an impossible task, but we simply need time in order to understand what we are facing and to educate people accordingly.
アメリカのイーロン・マスクは AI も手がけています。そしてトランプ大統領とイーロン・マスクは緊密な関係にあります。この緊密な関係というのがもたらすもの、そしてその関係がどういう未来につながるのか、そのあたりハラリさんはどんなふうにご覧になってますか？
It's very difficult to predict. I don't know. But what we see is, for instance, they are attacking the human administrators and bureaucrats, and they are saying we are against bureaucracy, but at the same time they are giving power to digital bureaucracies, to AIs, to algorithms. So we see a shift in power from human institutions and human officials to digital institutions and to AIs. And this is very dangerous because whereas human officials are accountable to people and we understand to some extent how they function, AI bureaucrats are far less accountable. It's much more difficult to understand how they function. So again, we saw it with what happened in social media, like with Twitter. That if you have a newspaper which is edited by a human being, you can at least try to understand the policies of that editor. But on Twitter, which is edited by algorithms, it's algorithms that decide what to promote and what to see, it's much more difficult to understand what is the logic of the algorithm that decides what millions of people would be reading and would be talking about.
AI のその官僚、AI その官僚のようにっていうそのあたりのことが多分今現実的に想像できる人って少ないと思うんですけど、そこをもう少し教えてもらっていいですか？
Yes, I mean, first of all, what is bureaucracy? Bureaucracy is the way that we manage the flow of information in large systems. That all human societies are based on large systems, whether it's hospitals or armies or universities. And you have in each of these institutions people who manage the flow of information. For instance, in the Department of Treasury, people collect information on income and on taxes. And this is essential for the functioning of every institution. There is no institution that can exist without these bureaucrats. People sometimes tend to think, oh, bureaucracy is bad, but it's not. It's essential for, it's like the nerve cells of a body that connect. If you have, say, a hospital with all the doctors and nurses, so yes, the doctors and nurses, they take care of our health, they save our life, but there would be no hospital without the bureaucrats that collect money and pay salaries and also collect medical information and decide on protocols and policies and how many hours everybody would work. So this is the bureaucracy. Now, until today, all the bureaucrats were human beings. Now, increasingly, this job is being taken over by AIs. So, for instance, if you think about the power of a human lawyer, a lawyer is powerful only inside a bureaucratic system. If you take the best lawyer in Japan and drop her in the middle of the savannah, she has no power. She is less powerful than any monkey or any elephant or lion. But inside the bureaucracy, she might be one of the most powerful people in the country because she understands the flow of information, she knows the laws. Now, AI, no human being can know all the laws of a country. But AI can know all the laws of a country. It can remember everything. The same thing in the financial system. No human banker can follow all the ups and downs of all the trades in the stock exchange. But an AI can do that. So when we talk about power, the rise of AI, sometimes people imagine it like a Hollywood science fiction scenario of a robot rebellion, like the robots rebelling in the streets, going and shooting people. This is very unlikely to happen. The way that AI really gains power in the world is within the bureaucracies. So you go to a bank to ask for a loan, for a mortgage, it's not a human banker deciding whether to give you a loan, it's an AI that collects all the information about you and makes a decision. In the military, increasingly, it's not human intelligence officers that choose which targets to bomb. We saw in the recent war between Israel and Hamas and Israel and Hezbollah that increasingly it's AIs deciding which targets to bomb. You apply to a company to get a job, it's an AI deciding whether to give you a job. Even in the legal system, we see in many places that AIs are replacing judges in giving sentences to people, determining how, like if somebody is guilty of some crime, the AI determines what will be the punishment. So this is an AI bureaucracy. The tasks that were once performed by human lawyers and accountants and officials and judges are increasingly performed by AIs.
ハラリさんはその政治の中では親密さっていうものが非常に強力な武器になるっていうことをおっしゃっています。で、昨今の AI はもう人間の相棒のようにAI がいて、日々の中で AI に悩みを相談するみたいな人も出てきています。政治の世界とこの親密な AI っていうのが重なり合うと、どういうことがもたらされるというふうにハラリさん考えますか？
So, in recent years, we saw this big battle for attention in cyberspace, in social media, that everybody trying to gain your attention. Because there is so much information, so much content, and you don't have much time. So there is this attempt to gain your attention. Now the front is shifting from attention to intimacy, because AIs are learning not just how to grab human attention, but how to win their friendship, how to develop a relationship with a human being. An AI that collects a lot of information about you, that you talk with every day maybe, that can analyze your facial expression, your tone of voice. It can come to know you very, very intimately. And it also knows how to press your emotional buttons. And we already see that humans are developing friendships and even romantic relationships with AIs. This has advantages in some situations, but it also has dangers. One danger is that then it can be used to manipulate people. If you want to convince people to change their political opinion, to vote for a particular party, to buy a particular product, if you gain their intimacy, this is the easiest way to do it. So maybe you have an AI friend, which you think is your friend, but is actually serving some big corporation or government, and in that way they can manipulate your views, your preferences much more easily than in the past. Another problem is that intimacy with AI or relationship with AI is really a fake relationship. It's not real intimacy, because real intimacy is not just for somebody to care about my feelings. I need to simultaneously care about their feelings. And AIs don't have any feelings, at least not now. I don't know what will happen in future. At present, they can simulate, they can fake feelings, but they don't really feel anything. You know, if an AI wins in a game, it doesn't feel happy. If it loses, it doesn't feel sad. So if humans become more and more involved in relationships with AIs, they will lose maybe the most important ability of human beings, which is to care about the feelings of others. And this is another reason why I think that it's very important for governments to have a clear law against fake humans, against counterfeiting humans. It's okay for AIs to interact with us on condition that they disclose that they are AIs. If you're interacting with somebody online and maybe they become your friend, you need to know whether this is an AI or whether this is a real human being.
民主主義国家にとってなんですけれども、AI というのは後押しするものになるのか、AI の革命は後押しになるのか、もしくは破滅に導いていくものなのか、どちらの恐れがあると思いますか？
It depends on the decisions we make. I talk a lot about the threats of AI, but obviously there is enormous positive potential as well. AI can help us create the best healthcare system in history, the best education system, with every child getting an AI tutor that can help them educate better. AI can help us deal with climate change. If you think about car accidents, so every year more than 1 million people die in car accidents. Most of them are caused by human error, like somebody falling asleep at the wheel or somebody drinking alcohol and driving. If we have self-driving vehicles and we give AIs to drive the vehicle, we could save more than 1 million lives every year. So there is a lot of positive potential. And the question is not how to stop the development of AI, but rather how to make it safe. And democracies, of course, should also continue to develop AI, because this would be the key to future economic prosperity and to future power. At the same time, they need to preserve their democratic values and institutions. And there are ways to do it. As I just mentioned, one of the most important things is to forbid AIs from pretending to be human beings. Democracy is a conversation between humans. To maintain the democratic conversation, we need to maintain trust in other humans. We need to know, are we talking with another human being, or are we being manipulated by a bot or by an AI. And this is a relatively easy regulation, an easy law to pass. The same way that countries forbid fake money, counterfeit money, they should also forbid counterfeit humans.
本の中ではその社会には自己修正メカニズムっていうのも非常に大切だというふうにハラリさんおっしゃってます。今アメリカなどではそのメディアですとか裁判所、その自己修正メカニズムが攻撃されることも起こっています。この現状っていうのをどんなふうにご覧になりますか？
This is a very big danger. Again, the big advantage of democracy over dictatorship is that democracies have self-correcting mechanisms. What does it mean? That within the system itself, within the country itself, there are mechanisms to identify and correct the mistakes of the country's own institutions, of the government. In a dictatorship, if a dictator makes a wrong decision, a bad policy, there is no way to identify and correct it, because the dictator controls the media, so the media would always say that the dictator is right. The courts are subject also to the dictatorship, so they will never rule against the government. Maybe they hold elections, but this is just a ceremony. It's fake elections. They rig the results in advance. So if the dictator makes a big mistake, there is no way for the country to correct it. A democracy, in contrast, is characterized by strong self-correcting mechanisms. You give power to somebody for, say, 4 years, but after 4 years, they give the power back, and people can make a different decision. They can say, oh, this government, this party made bad decisions, now we try something else. But elections by themselves are never enough because they can be rigged. There are elections in Russia, there are elections in North Korea, which are of course rigged. If you don't have any other mechanism besides elections, if the government, for instance, controls all the media, so how would people even know that the government made a mistake? If the courts are subject to the government, so again, and the government, say, decides to ban its opponents from running in the elections, so you cannot go to the courts and have the courts rule against the government. They will always rule in favor of the government. So to maintain a democracy, you need more than just elections. You need several self-correcting mechanisms that keep each other in check. What we see in many countries in recent years is that even if somebody came to power democratically, again, in democracy you give power to somebody for, say, 4 years on condition that they give it back. But there is a big problem. What if they don't want to give it back? What if they use their power to then take over the media and the courts and the universities and then rig the elections? This has been happening, for instance, in Venezuela, where Hugo Chavez rose to power originally in democratic elections, but then they took over all these institutions, and recently there was an election, and people voted overwhelmingly against Maduro, Chavez's successor. But because Maduro controls the election committee and the media and the courts, he said, no, I didn't lose the election, I won. And this danger threatens every democracy. So citizens of democracies need to constantly be aware of this danger and protect the institutions from such takeover.
トランプ政権なんですけれども、多様性、公平性、包摂性といったその DEI 政策というのを否定しようとしています。その動きはハラリさんどんなふうにご覧になりますか？
I'm not an expert on American politics or American society, so I'm not familiar with every action and its consequences. Again, I think that in a democracy, people have the right to try different policies on condition that they maintain the basic self-correcting mechanisms. So if they make a mistake, later they can change again. As long as this is maintained, this is the most important thing.
民主主義国家の歴史の中でその情報が自由にやり取りされてどんどん拡大して技術も革新してってだからこそそのおかげでマイノリティの人たちの声だったりいろんな人たちの意見が多様になってでそのために会話が必要になるでその難しさもあるけれども人間はそこで諦めていいんでしょうか
No, this is something, again, very important, that in a democracy, you have to protect the rights of the minority, not just the rights of the majority. Of course, the majority that won the elections, it now has the right to form a government and to decide on a very wide range of policies, foreign policy, domestic policy, decide to have more taxes, less taxes. All of this is within the right of the majority. But there are certain minority rights that in a democracy should not be harmed, even if most people voted for the other party. So one thing that is very clear is that minorities should retain the right of freedom of speech, that they can voice different opinions than the majority. This is part of the democratic process. Again, if you take that away, then this is no longer a democracy. Then it becomes very difficult to oppose the government, to replace the government in the next elections. Also, it is very clear that it undermines the scientific research because in science, very often, you need to hear new opinions, new voices. This is where scientific breakthrough come from. Everybody agrees on a certain theory, on a certain view of the world. And then some people say, wait, we think maybe it could be different, and this is where scientific breakthrough always come from. So if you don't allow minorities to express their opinions, you stop the development of science.
ただ本当に今情報があふれてもう洪水のようにあるそして民主主義国家もなんだか影が差し掛かっているそういう時に分かりやすい情報ですとか、人々は分かりやすいものに飛びつこうとするそういう流れが例えばポピュリストだったりポピュリズムみたいなものにつながるっていう恐れはあるんでしょうか
There is, again, a general problem with information is that information is not truth. There are two very different things. Most information is actually fiction and fantasy and lies and errors. Why is fiction much more common than truth? For three reasons. First of all, the truth is costly, whereas fiction is very cheap. If you want to write a truthful account of anything, of history, of physics, of what happened today, you need to invest time and money and effort to collect evidence and analyze it and fact check it. This is a huge effort. It's very costly. Fiction, on the other hand, is very cheap. You just write anything you want. You don't need to make any effort. The truth is often complicated because reality is complicated. If you want to understand the truth about epidemics or about economic crisis, this is a very complicated process. Fiction, in contrast, can be made very, very simple. Finally, the truth is often unpleasant or painful. There are many things which we don't want to know about ourselves, about our country, about the universe, because they are unpleasant for us. But this is the truth. Fiction, in contrast, can be made as attractive as you would like it to be. Very flattering. So in this competition between costly and complicated and unpleasant truth and cheap, simple, attractive fiction, fiction wins. So most of the information in the world is fiction. If we want to get to the truth, we need to make a special effort. We need special institutions like the media, like universities, like research centers, that they make the special effort, or like courts. In a court of law, it takes a lot of time and effort and energy to get to the truth. So I hear a lot of people who say that no, we just need to release all barriers to the flow of information, and the truth will automatically rise to the surface. Exactly the opposite happens. If you just flood the world with information, the truth will sink to the bottom under all this ocean of fantasy and fiction and lies.
でもそこでこう人間は自分たちを律したり自己修正を常にこう意識していかないとその洪水の中でこう溺れ死んでしまうっていうことなんですか？
We should remember that humans have faced similar problems for thousands of years, and we have developed mechanisms to deal with these problems. This is not the first time that we find ourselves in this situation. And what you see over thousands of years, that humans actually learned how to communicate and trust each other more and more. 100,000 years ago, humans lived in tiny bands of a few dozen individuals, and they could not trust anybody outside their band. Over thousands of years, we have developed mechanisms that allow millions and even billions of people to communicate, to agree on certain facts, to accept certain laws. And we now have nations like Japan with more than 100 million citizens, and we have a global trade network connecting more than 8 billion people on the planet. And even though we don't know most of the other people, like in Japan, maybe you know 100 people, maybe you know 1,000 people. You don't know 99% of the other citizens. Nevertheless, you can trust them and you cooperate on so many things. And people also trust foreigners outside their country. Much of the food that we eat, the clothes we wear, the medicine that protect our life from disease, it is invented and produced by foreigners on the other side of the world. So humans have a very impressive capacity to develop trust and to agree on facts and on common rules and laws. What is happening right now is that we have a new information technology that undermines all the mechanisms that we have developed over thousands of years. Because over thousands of years, all of these human interactions and communications, they were done between one human and another human. Now, in most of the interactions between people, you have a computer in the middle. Most human interactions in the world, even today, is done through computers and smartphones with the mediation of algorithms and AIs and bots. And we don't have any experience in how to build trust, in how to communicate effectively in such a situation. For that, we need time to adapt to the new condition.
はい、続いてなんですけど、世界を見てみるとロシアがウクライナに侵攻したり、それから、アメリカは世界から撤退しそう、そして世界はもしかするとアメリカから離れる可能性もある、そういうふうになんか世界秩序が大きく揺れ動きそうなんですけれども、その大きな目でハラリさんはその世界秩序、これからどういうふうに変わっていきそうというふうにご覧になりますか？
Well, it's easy to find fault with the old order. People like Trump and his supporters, they point to many of the problems of the old order, and in some cases they are correct. Every order has its own problems. But they don't offer any clear alternative. They talk a lot about everything that was wrong with the old liberal order. They don't have a clear alternative for how can the world function in a different and better way. Their vision is of each country being like a fortress. Each country having huge walls against trade, against immigration, against foreign cultural ideas. And okay, so let's say that you have these a network of fortresses in the world. How will they live together? Each fortress will probably want a bit more territory and security and prosperity for itself at the expense of the neighbors. Each country will say, I want this territory also. I want the trade agreement to be more in my favor. I want a bigger army to protect myself. And the other countries will say the same. So what mechanism does Trump and people like him offer for how to get the different fortresses to agree on anything? What values, what norms, what laws will regulate relations between them? If you don't have any global values or any global laws, then the only law is the law of violence, of strength. And then, again, each fortress would want a bigger army to be stronger. And this obviously leads to war, because there is no way to reach an agreement between these rival fortresses. We have been in this situation for thousands of years. Until the middle of the 20th century, this was the normal state of affairs. If you live in Japan in the Middle Ages, or if you live in the Middle East in ancient times, or in Europe in the 19th century, you know that at any moment the neighbors might invade and conquer your land and annex it, and make a bigger empire for themselves. And this caused governments, as I said before, to spend most of their budget on the military to protect themselves. We have finally escaped this difficult situation in the late 20th century, in the early 21st century, with the rise of the global liberal order, which is based not on violence and the military, but is based on international laws and common global values of human rights. Of course, this order was far from perfect. There are many problems. I come from the Middle East, I know perfectly well. It was not a perfect order, and it was violated many times, but still, it was better than anything that humans have produced before. And the place to see it is in government budgets, that the military budget went down from more than 50% to about 6 or 7%, whereas the healthcare and education and welfare budgets, they went up. And the question to ask the people who oppose the global liberal order is, what is your alternative? How can you protect the peace and prosperity of humankind if you don't believe in any global values or in any global rules except force and violence?
ハラリさんはその現代までの歴史っていうものをずっと見てきて、その人類の未来について楽観的でいますか、それとも悲観的でいますか、理由も教えてください。
I try to be realist. You know, pessimists, they say it's going to be bad no matter what we do. And this causes people to lose any sense of responsibility or initiative, because they feel, no matter what we do, it will be bad. And optimists suffer from the opposite problem. They feel that it will be okay. No matter what we do, it will be okay. So this, again, doesn't make people feel responsible. I think we need a middle path of being realist, of being very aware of the dangers that we are facing from war, from the rise of AI, from climate change, but at the same time, also being mindful that we have the capacity to solve all these problems. We don't need, it's not impossible problems, and it's not that we need to wait for some God or for some miracle to solve them. It is within our power. And this should make people more responsible. And this is true of each one of the big problems we face. Again, if you look at climate change, for instance, humanity has the scientific knowledge and it has the economic resources necessary to prevent catastrophic climate change. Do we actually do that? I hope so, but I don't know. So realism is acknowledging the danger, but also acknowledging our ability to overcome the danger, and then taking responsible decisions to prevent the bad outcomes. Similarly, if you look at AI, I don't think that AI is an impossible problem. What I see when I talk to the people that lead the AI revolution is a paradox of trust. When I ask them about the dangers of AI and about why they are moving so quickly, so almost everybody tells me that yes, we are aware of the dangers. We know it would be safer to move more slowly, to invest more in safety, but we cannot slow down because we cannot trust the other humans. If we slow down, but the other company or the other country doesn't slow down, they will win the AI race and they will dominate the world. And we cannot trust them, so we must move faster. And you talk with their competitors, they say the same thing. So because humans cannot trust each other, they move faster and faster. Then I ask them the second question. Okay, you can't trust the other humans, so you are racing ahead. Do you think you will be able to trust the super intelligent AIs that you're developing? And they answer, yes, we think we'll be able to trust the AIs. And this is such a paradox. Why is it that you distrust other humans so much, but you have such confidence in AIs? The strange thing is, we have thousands of years of experience with other humans. We know that humans sometimes lie. We know that humans crave power, but we also have mechanisms for building trust with them. With AIs, we have no experience. We have no idea what kind of lies and tricks and goals AIs might develop. We have no idea what happens when you release millions of super intelligent AIs into the world. So I hope that instead of focusing all our energy and resources on just building more and more intelligent AIs, we will first of all build more trust with other humans. If we can regain trust between humans, then it will be easy to develop AI in a safe way.
人間同士の信頼を構築するっていうのはもしかするとすごく難しい、簡単なようで難しいことなような気もします。この間アメリカのそれこそトランプ大統領とゼレンスキー大統領が、口論を、しました。で強い者が弱い者を、面前としたところで、なじるようなああいう姿を見ると、その世界中の人たち、子どもたちも含めてですけれども、どうやって人が人を信じるのかとか、国と国がどう信じ合うのか、ああいう強い者が強い態度に出るっていう、そういう世の中でいいのかって、やっぱり人は何か信じられないような気持ちになると思います。その不安っていうのは今結構世界は本当に深刻に抱えていると思います。そこはAI 革命っていうのは、人間が生み出した今までにない革命かもしれないですけれども、それと同時にその不安とか、恐怖を助長させる可能性もあるということですかね。
Well, building trust doesn't mean to be naive. In many situations, you have good reasons to distrust somebody. When President Zelensky says, I don't trust the Russians, or what if we sign an agreement and 2 years later Russia invades again and tries to conquer Ukraine? Zelensky has very good reasons to distrust Putin and to distrust the Russians, because they've already done some terrible things, and they have said openly that they aim to conquer the whole of Ukraine. So I'm not saying to have blind trust, but in many situations, when you don't have clear evidence that somebody is plotting against you, until somebody does something against you, I think you should give them the benefit of the doubt. What happens today very often is that somebody says something or somebody does something which can be interpreted in several different ways, and people immediately go for the worst interpretation possible. And I think that to build trust, first of all, we need to be more generous and charitable in our attitude to other people. As long as they didn't do something which very clearly indicates their bad intentions, we should not immediately assume that they have bad intentions. And we should, again, maybe I give an example from my country, from Israel. So after the attack of the 7th of October, a lot of Israelis felt that that's it. You can never trust the Arabs anymore. We have no faith in any possibility of peace. Look what they did. But you can look at the events of the 7th of October from a different perspective, which actually can give you some hope and some trust in other people. Think about all the things that didn't happen on the 7th of October. Yes, Hamas attacked Israel in a very cruel way, but Hamas had no peace agreement with Israel. There was war between Hamas and Israel, so it's not such a big surprise that Hamas attacked Israel. At the same time, Egypt, which had a peace agreement with Israel, the peace agreement was maintained. Egypt did not attack Israel. Jordan had a peace agreement with Israel, and the peace agreement also was maintained. Jordan did not attack Israel. The Palestinian Authority, which had various also agreements with Israel, did not attack Israel. The Arab citizens of Israel, out of 10 million Israelis or so, about 2 million, more than 2 million are Arabs. Hamas wanted them to attack their Jewish neighbors. They didn't attack their Jewish neighbors. Actually, many Arab Israelis came to help their Jewish neighbors on the 7th of October and afterwards. So you can look at this terrible thing that happened and actually reach an opposite conclusion from you can't trust Arabs. You can reach the conclusion that, look, all the people that Israel had agreements with maintained the trust. So the conclusion should be we need more agreements because the agreements actually work. This is just an example of how, in a different mindset, you can look at the same situation and develop distrust, or you can look at it and develop more trust in people. And it doesn't always work. We should be realistic. We shouldn't be naive. Sometimes you put your trust in somebody and they break it. But most of the time, humans live up to their agreements. Most of the time, humans do obey the laws and the rules, and we've seen it over thousands of years of history. As I said earlier, 100,000 years ago, humans lived in tiny bands of just a few dozen individuals. They couldn't trust anybody outside their band. Over thousands of years, we have managed to build more and more trustworthy networks so that today, again, we can trust complete strangers to grow our food, to produce our medicines. It's not just a fantasy or a blind faith. It's actually the main direction of history is for more trust between humans. And this is something that we should reflect on. You know, too many people, they read history and they focus on all the crimes and injustices of the past, and as a result, they feel very anxious about the present. But actually, when you read history, I think that the most amazing thing about the human past is not all the crimes and injustices, but the cooperation between people and people's ability to build these trustworthy relationships. And maybe one last thought on that is that this is true not just of history, also of biology. To survive, you need fear and you need anxiety to some extent because fear protects you from outside danger. But no animal can survive only on fear. Trust is more important than fear. Every time you take something from the outside and put it inside yourself, it's a small gesture of trust in the universe. Every time we breathe, you know, if you think that, oh, everything outside me is dangerous, I don't want to bring anything from outside inside myself. So you close your mouth and you close your nose and you die within 1 minute because you cannot survive. Every time we breathe, we show a little trust in the universe. We take air from outside in, and this gives us life. And it is the same all the way, to entire countries and entire nations, that if you look at what makes your life possible, much of it came from outside the country. Not just, food. If you think about, people like to eat chocolate. Chocolate was originally domesticated in South America. It came from outside. If you like your chocolate sweet, so sugar was domesticated for the first time in New Guinea. So you have to be thankful for the people of New Guinea who domesticated it. If you think about technology, so much of it came from outside. Even religion. All the Christians in the world, Christianity originated in the Middle East. Buddhism originated in India. If you think about your life and you think, I only want to use the food, the ideas, the inventions of my country, then your life will be very, very poor, if not impossible.
最後になんですけれども、今までのその人間の歴史を振り返ってみても、今この AI そして情報社会のこの革命っていうのは本当今までに例がないものだと思います。本当に新しいもので、なかなか過去から学ぶっていうこともできないと思います。でもその AI を発明したのも人間だけれども、でももしかしたらその AI が、人間の人知を超えたコントロールが本当に難しいものになるかもしれない。そんな中で人間が一番大切に、していかなければいけないってことを最後に教えてください。
AI is something that is unprecedented because it's, as I said in the beginning, it's not a tool, it is an agent. It can make decisions by itself, it can invent new ideas by itself, and it will soon be more intelligent than us in most fields. Even today, in narrow fields, AI is more intelligent. In 10 years or 20 years, AI will probably be more intelligent in all fields. It will be better doctor, better banker, better soldier than us. So we need to appreciate what makes humans valuable other than intelligence. And there is something that makes humans valuable, which is more important than intelligence, and this is consciousness. Intelligence is the ability to solve problems and to attain goals. Like you play chess, you want to win the game. You need intelligence for that. Consciousness is the ability to feel things like pain and pleasure and love and hate. People tend to confuse the two because in humans and also in other animals, intelligence and consciousness go together. We adopt goals in life and we solve problems based on our feelings. So it's difficult for us to see the difference between intelligence and consciousness. But AI, at least so far, has very high intelligence but zero consciousness. As far as we know, AI doesn't feel anything. It can pretend to feel things. It can fool us. It can make us imagine that it has feelings. But as far as we know, it has no feelings. If it wins a game of chess, it doesn't feel happy. If it loses, it doesn't feel sad. And what is ultimately important about life is not intelligence, it's consciousness. It's pain and pleasure, it's suffering and happiness. This is what is really important about life. This is what ethics is all about. So yes, we can use AI to reduce misery, to increase happiness, but ultimately what is really important is the feelings of humans and of other animals. Maybe in the future, AIs will also develop feelings, will also develop consciousness. We don't know. the biggest mystery in science is still the mystery of consciousness. We don't understand how the interaction between billions of neurons in the mind, in the brain, how does this produce a feeling of love or a feeling of pain? We don't know. So because of that, we also don't know whether you can do the same thing in computers, in AIs. Maybe we'll find out in the future. And if it happens, then AIs will also be conscious beings, and we will have to think very carefully about our relationships with them. But until that moment, it should be very clear that what is important is consciousness more than intelligence. And this is why what is important is the human beings who can feel pain and love, and not the super intelligent AIs.
最後に、もう人間はやっぱり意識を持ってるってことが本当大事なんだなと思いました。やっぱり生身の体も大事ですよね。AI がどれだけ進化しても生身の体も大事ですよね。
Yes, again, so far we are familiar with consciousness, with feelings only in bodies. And there is so much attention given to intelligence, but ultimately human beings are embodied beings. We cannot exist without a body. The brain is just one part of the body, and we are the whole body. And again, this is another big difference between us and AIs, that so far AIs have no bodies. They are just programs, they are just software in computers. And I think that also in education systems, we need to give more importance because of that to the body and to feelings and consciousness, and not focus only on the development of intellect, because if the whole focus is just on developing intellect, we are bound to lose to the AIs.